March 4th, 2025, Nacogdoches City Council meeting. Brad, would you lead us in prayer, please?
Lord, we come before you this evening to ask for your guidance and your wisdom and your grace. It is our sworn duty and responsibility to act for the good of all the people of Nacogdoches and not for our own personal gain or bias. And as we come before you tonight, help us to live in your light and forgive us for the moments when we fail. We are blessed to live in a land where we have the freedom to say this, to be honest in your presence, and to thank you and rejoice in your eternal grace. In Jesus Christ's name I pray, amen.
Amen. Amen. If you'll stand for the pledges.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
Okay, next item on the agenda is open forum. We have one open forum participant. Mr. McCandless, please.
Mayor, council members, my name's Robert McCandless. I live over here on 410 King Street. And I'm here to present an idea which I believe will be very beneficial in bringing tourism and revenue to downtown. I'd like to address the sport that serves most of our citizens than any other here in town, and that is pickleball. Silly as the name may sound, it's the fastest growing sport in the nation and increasing worldwide. And believe me, our community plays pickleball. The courts at Maroney Park are frequented well over 500 times a week by nearly 1,000 players in the city, along with visitors from Lufkin, Central Heights, Timpson, and SFA students. And while SFA has a tennis team totaling only 8, it now has an unofficial pickleball team of 24 players or more who traveled from Dallas and who traveled to Dallas and Houston last fall to play universities from all over the United States. It's going to be an intramural sport soon. Nacogdoches players range from 15 years old to 87 years old. Myself and the older unemployed people, we begin play every morning at Maroney when the temperature reaches about 40 degrees. We gather, it's 20 or 30 more seniors play for 3 to 4 hours until we either get tired or hungry. Many days, even more show up as the growing community holds birthday parties for its players. Those burdened with jobs gather after work at Maroney around 5:30 and the courts fill the courts at night beyond capacity many evenings, forcing people to use the Bonita Park courts on Pearl Street. Weekends, of course, fill the courts with families if they can find a court to play on. The tournaments that are crucial to pickleball growth fill the courts many weekends, preventing access for recreational players. Thursday Night League also fills the courts, turning players away. We have a decision to make about the future of a growing spectator sport in our community and its relation to the city revenue for downtown. The courts are occupied every weekday morning and evening and all day on weekends. If we want foot traffic downtown for business, to me it seems to be a simple choice that I ask the city to consider the possibility of placing some courts in Festival Park or somewhere downtown. I will be sending each of you guys I skipped a point here. Let's fill hotel beds and restaurants by inviting pickleball league and professional tournament to play here, along with providing courts for future university intramural play and the growing number of our citizens who seek physical exercise and a closely knit community. I'll be sending statistical information on the growth of pickleball in smaller cities and things, and try to find non-biased information to you guys as time goes on and work from there.
Thank you very much, Robert. Okay. Next item will be items to be removed from the consent agenda.
I make a motion, we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Have a motion and a second for approval of the consent agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Now going to the regular agenda, we're going to move item F to item A. So, case, we'll get to you in just a minute. All right, so we're going to consider the resolution number 1386-03-25, supporting the interpretation, site development, partnership, and funding opportunities for the Eyes of Father McGill site located at 100 East Main Street. Community Services Director.
Mayor,
Jess.
Council, Jessica Sal, Community Services Director. The item we have before you today is for City Council to consider supporting this resolution. We understand that it's a bit vague. It says a lot of possible things. But essentially, we're asking for your support for the City of Nacogdoches to pursue several different opportunities for partnerships, for funding opportunities, for maybe some ownership transfer or joint management, with the ultimate goal of fully interpreting and restoring our Eyes of Father Marhill site. If you haven't been there, if you go to Liberty Hall, walk down Lenana Creek Trail a little bit, there are 3 beautiful springs that Father Marhill historically hit with a staff and ended a drought here in Nacogdoches in 1718. And since that time, the city has restored some stair steps down there. There's some interpretive signage, and there's a beautiful lily pond, but there could be more. So Representative Joanne Schaffner has been very supportive of city staff and has facilitated a few conversations between the city and Texas Historic Commission. We've also applied for a Texas Preservation Trust Fund grant and are working with our partners over at TxDOT to figure out how we fully interpret this site. It could look a multitude of different ways. So this resolution supports city staff continuing those conversations, figuring out the best course of action for this site. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
I'd just like to make a comment that there's a beautiful mural on the back of my building, too. You
There is.
at downtown Nacogdoches, Johnson's Furniture, so I'm just plugging it.
There absolutely is. And we can put that image on an interpretive sign in the future.
You could bring his building down there,
Maybe. That's quite a feat right there, but maybe we could reproduce the mural.
visitor center.
Absolutely.
you would get the right of way.
Oh, that's a good point.
Okay, any discussion?
I just think it's great. It's something that we need. It's something that's been here, but when it hasn't been celebrated, so I think it's wonderful.
Well, thank you. And I think this presents a lot of opportunities for us to fully interpret, Spanish history in Nacogdoches, the El Camino Real. There's a lot of regional tourism that this fits right into very naturally.
I'm all in.
Absolutely.
I have comments, but I'm going to wait until we hear from other people. So I know there are people here who want to speak too.
Okay. David, you want to come up first? Now, we have 3 minutes on this. This is the same way as open forum. Yeah.
I have 3 sentences.
Okay.
Stephen F. Austin has come to be known as the father of Texas. Father Marhill has come to be called the apostle of Texas. In his journal, Stephen F. Austin wrote about the miracle that happened. He said, the miracle at Lenana Creek, he wrote, this miracle was canonized in Rome, and an engraving of the fact was made in order to perpetuate it. Stephen F. Austin was not Catholic. He wasn't Spanish, but he recognized this miracle saved Nacogdoches and the missions. And the Springs has become an important local landmark which draws hundreds of pilgrims to Nacogdoches every year. The Lenana Creek Trail, following Lenana Creek, goes through some of the most historic parts of Nacogdoches. I think it's important that that landmark, at the beginning there, the springs, which draws so many people to this trail, be developed so to make it accessible. I'm in a wheelchair. I haven't been down there since 2021, and it's because I'm in a wheelchair. So I think it's important that we make it accessible.
All right, thank you, sir, very much. Okay, Peggy?
My name is Peggy Hasso. I think I know most of you. And I just was talking to Brad before this started, and I wasn't prepared to speak, but he talked me into it. This has been a lifelong dream for me. I was born in Nacogdoches in 1949, and about 7 generations have been born here. And seeing this happen would be the lifelong dream of mine, like I said. It's very important, and if anybody knows the history of Stephen F. Austin, they know that he was kind of a skeptic. But when he writes in his prison diaries that this happened, that's really a big deal. And we need to honor our history, our long history of starting in 1716 when Nacogdoches was founded. And we need to continue that with doing something like this. So I'm very excited about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy, very much. Okay, Chris?
Evening, Mayor, councilors. I'm Chris LeBove. I live at 522 East Main Street. My wife Danielle and I moved here about 3.5 years ago to start a family. You can see my 2-year-old and my 2-week-old right back there. Thank you for considering the development of the Eyes of Father Marhill. I'm especially excited about this as a member of the Historic Landmark Preservation Committee. This is one of the most historic landmarks and the oldest that we have in town. Father Antonio Marhill is a pillar of Nacogdoches' rich history. Not only is he the original founder of the Spanish mission here in Nacogdoches, he has performed one of the only Vatican-approved miracles in the United States. The Catholic Church is actively working to promote his cause for sainthood, and some already call him the patron saint of Texas. The Diocese of Tyler has also named Sacred Heart Catholic Church as a pilgrimage site this year for the Jubilee. And all this is to say that we should expect an influx of pilgrims, religious tourists in the coming years, and the development of this miracle site will go a long way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So I would like to say that the people who all came up here and spoke, David Gabler, Peggy Hasso, and both Danielle and Chris LeBove with their little ones there, that all of them have worked hard to provide materials and information to Representative Schaffner and to secure the funding for the mural, which you thankfully allowed on your building. And and there are so many more people who are so excited about this. This is such an important part of our history and our heritage and our spiritual heritage too. And I appreciate all of you all for the work you've done for so many years. And I just wanted to thank you all too.
And I left you out.
I thought, but I didn't know we would have so many wonderful speakers. I have absolutely nothing to add.
Okay.
We also have Father George back here. I don't know if
I didn't
he.
want you to feel like I'd left you
It's
out.
not, so, just,
Okay, any other discussion?
I'd like,
Happiest council meeting I've ever been to. I love it.
Something else?
no, I just want to make the motion.
Okay, sure.
I would like to make the motion that we approve the resolution number 1388-03-25 as written in item 6F, which is now 6A.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you all.
Okay. Now we'll go back up to 6A. Next item is consider approval of a contract by and between the City of Nacogdoches and Dupla Chain Contractors LLC for the 2025 Ridgebrook Drive Drainage Improvements Project for a not-to-exceed amount of $263,060. Mr. Opperman.
Mayor, City Council, Case Opperman, Director of Public Works and City Engineer. Unfortunately, it's all downhill from here, so, make
Oh,
this as short
no,
and sweet as
that's
I can.
bad.
It's hard to follow, Jessica.
Down.
So, we did, on February 19th, receive bids for a project that we've been talking about for a long time. You will remember the Kenbrook Drainage Project, which I thought, was a little confusing since this is actually on Ridgebrook Drive, and there's a Kenbrook Drive parallel to it, so took the liberty of renaming it, but it's the same project that we've been talking about for several years now. We're going to utilize our ARPA funding for it. Thankful to have that to utilize. It's about 660 linear feet of pipe and inlets that we're going to add to this street, just to alleviate some of the flooding issues that they've been plagued with for some time. Duplachain Contractors was the lowest of 5 bids. Sorry. Thank you, Rhonda. That we received, and it's, I have to say, a great price from a great contractor. They are ready to start work immediately, and so we would recommend award to them in the amount of $263,060. And just as a reminder, this is utilizing the American Rescue Plan Act funding, so there is budget there for that. So happy to answer any questions after public comment.
I saw them working at the end of University and the Loop today. That doesn't tie into, surely that wouldn't tie. Okay, separate deal,
effort, yes,
okay.
sir. Still
all right.
Duplachain, but
Okay, yeah.
separate effort.
Okay.
Yes.
So, so I just have a real quick question. I know you were visiting with them, and will we need other on Ridgebrook, the sand coming down, and will we need other things, or will this cover it all, or what will happen?
So what Councilman Bellinger's referring to, I met with 215, who designed this project, and a couple of other residents along Ridgebrook who were not directly affected by this project. They've got some other issues coming from the area near the baseball field on NISD's property, and so we took some pictures, 215 did, actually, and we're going to put our heads together. Not certain if there's solutions with this current project, but we are going to facilitate some meetings with NISD to try to figure out how to alleviate some of that issue, so.
Okay, thank you for doing that, really appreciate you.
Happy to.
How much had we budgeted for this?
Well, this was part of our overall ARPA funding. I think our estimates were somewhere around 350,000. So you can see we were under that quite a bit. That was just the engineer's estimate when putting together the project. But from the ARPA funding, we've still got several million in the budget.
That was sort of my question: is how much our delta was as compared to what we had planned to spend on the project. Because I noticed we're 61,000. I mean, from the second highest bid, or the second lowest bid, excuse me. So that seems like a really good outcome for us. Are we seeing any sort of change in commercial construction costs?
I wouldn't say that necessarily. I think costs are continuing to rise, maybe not as drastically as in the past few years, but they're not generally going down. I know Duplachain, we hit kind of a sweet spot with their timing, and I know they needed a project to do, and this kind of fit right in the window that they had before their next big project starts. And so we were fortunate to be able to get a really good price out of them on this. And so you can see those next, 3, even 4, the rest of the bids, honestly, were all pretty tight, which means they all saw the same thing. And I think Duplachain, we'll make money on the job, but I think we got a really good deal from them because they needed something to do. So it's still kind of in that wheelhouse, 340,000 for this kind of work, which is about what we expected. So
Mr. Beverlin,
I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Yes.
There'll probably be some lag on impacts on costs. I think it'll take a little while. So I would say if we get solid bids, we take them now before we see any changes in commodities related to anything else in the world. So I'll just leave it at that.
You can see that, you know, they all pretty much said about the same thing. So I think the numbers were good, no matter which way you look at it. I think we're fortunate to get the number we got from DuPlain on this one.
Yeah, let's get started.
I think they're ready. So we'll get it as soon as they can sign contracts.
Okay, any other questions?
Make a motion, we approve the contract in item 6A as presented.
I'll second.
I have a motion second. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Next item, 6B, consider approval of a contract bond between the City of Nacogdoches and McKinney and Moore of Texas LLC for SWTP Filter 1 rehabilitation project for a not-to-exceed amount of $361,243.38. Mr. Opperman.
Mayor, City Council, Case Opperman, Director of Public Works and City Engineer. Bringing you another contract to consider, this time for a filter rehab out at the surface water treatment plant, otherwise known as the Lake Water Plant. There's 10 filters in our process out there in the treatment process. The CIP includes a filter rehab every other year, and that's just an effort to keep our plant in good operating condition. We've talked with the staff out there that operates this plant, and their next priority is Filter 1. And what that's going to entail is basically replacing the under drains in the filter media, installing some new transmitters, and a new valve and actuator for the filter as well. We do, like I said, we've done a couple of these in the past few years, Filter 7 and Filter 9. McKinney and Moore was actually the contractor on Filter 9, and they did a great job, and we're happy with their bid as well. They are out of Bullard, but like I said, they've done several successful projects for us, including filter rehab in the past few years. They're actually working out at the wastewater plant as well right now, and so we're very comfortable with them. This is, like I said, a CIP project, so it's funded out of the FY 24-25 CIP, and there is budget in that account for this. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
I just would like you to speak to the new wastewater treatment page that you have and explain what's on that page. I went and looked at it after you called our attention to it. It's just brilliant, and it has so much information.
Well, thank you. Yes, this was an effort that our wastewater treatment operating staff took the initiative to do, and I'm very proud of them for that. On our city page, we have a wastewater treatment section under the utilities tab, and they've done a really robust, really professional job of basically outlining the treatment process out at the wastewater treatment plant. They're also in the process of doing the same on the water treatment side, but it basically takes you from the top to the bottom of the plant, what the treatment process looks like, from the headworks all the way to the outfall into the creek. So, spoiler alert, it's clean when it goes to the creek. So it's all good things. But no, I was very proud of them, and they've been working hard on it. I know they have. Jackie Ramos and Barton Ronnie and them out there at the wastewater treatment plant. They're an asset to the city, and a lot of what they do is unseen and unheard of, but that doesn't make them any less important. So very, very, very good to have with us. So very proud of them.
I was real impressed to see your tours and your tour policy and the whole thing about how it works, and also the water service line map. That was fascinating. So thank you all for your.
Offer tours at the wastewater plant and the water plant.
I think we need to stay on what.
We're talking about wastewater right here.
No, it says consider approval of a contract. So.
Thank you anyway for everything you've done with that.
Any other discussion? Kathleen, you have anything else to say?
No, sir.
Okay, all right. I'll entertain a motion. I'll make a motion. We can approve contract with McKinney and Moore LLC for SWTP Filter 1 Rehabilitation Project for not to exceed amount of $361,243.38.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Item C, consider approval of a contract by and between the City of Nacogdoches and SCS Engineers for professional engineering services on landfill Block 0, cells 3 and 4 construction for not to exceed amount of $149,500. Assistant Director of Public Works.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. How are y'all doing this evening? It's been a while since I've been up here since we welcomed back Case. But we have a back. We're always looking to make sure we improve the lifetime expectancy of the greatest asset. One of the greatest assets of the city is a landfill, and so this is an opportunity. Back in about 22-23, which I wasn't around, but 22-23. The city decided to go, they had two different options. Pursue a minor permit modification for Block O, which is what this would be, or do a major permit amendment, which would take a little bit longer. And so what they chose to do was move down the minor permit modification route, which only took about a year. So in October of last year, we received from the TCQ the permit mod authorization to move forward with the design and construction of Block O, cells 3 and 4. And what that does is it gives us about 10 years of capacity in the landfill out there, which will buy us a little time to get the major permit modification done, which was approved a couple months ago through SCS, which will increase that capacity of that landfill for up to another 50 years. But that major permit modification will take almost 3 to 4 years to obtain, and then another 3 to 4 years to then implement those changes within that permit amendment. So what this is going to do is, SCS will help us design it and then assist us with bidding construction to get Block O, cells 3 and 4 constructed to allow us to have that extra capacity while we work through the next 4 to 6 years on the major permit amendment and construction. And so the landfill is, like I said earlier, is an asset to the city, and it's something that needs to be done to make sure that we have that capacity to continue to place waste material in the landfill for our citizens. So that's what we're looking for today, asking for approval for SCS to assist us with design and bidding assistance for the construction of Block O, cells 3 and 4.
Okay, any discussion? I'll entertain a motion.
Make a motion that we approve the contract in item 6C as presented.
Second. Have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Next item, 6D, discuss and consider adoption of the ordinance of the City of Nacogdoches, Texas, amending Chapter 74, Parks and Recreation, and adding Article 4, special events of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Nacogdoches, Texas, providing a severability clause, providing a continuation clause, providing a repeal clause, and providing an effective date.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Members of the council. Jerry Baker, City Attorney. As you will recall, back on February 12th, we had about a 2-hour workshop where we discussed special events. Part of that discussion was a review of what we have before you was the special events ordinance. Most of that discussion was led by Jessica Sal, and she'll be up here in just a few minutes. But part of the discussion was when we went basically step by step through the ordinance, the proposed ordinance that's before you. So you do have that ordinance in front of you. I want to point out a few changes that have occurred since that workshop, okay? Just to make that clear that, as we went through the workshop, there were a few items we wanted to kind of tweak here and there related to some of the discussion we had. So I want to point those out to you so that you're aware of that. So if you'll turn to page 5 of 9 in your ordinance.
We don't have that.
They don't have it. Okay. Well, I'll just explain to you.
I have it.
Okay. So, under fees and cost, the first part, if you recall, there was a blank there because we didn't know what the fees were going to be. And Jessica's going to address that in the guidelines discussion that will occur after this. But essentially, what I did was basically made a reference to a schedule in the city secretary's office, just kind of a placeholder until, as I mentioned, we are working on a master fee schedule. At some point in the future, you will see that in front of you, and then that reference will be to the master fee schedule, okay? The second change to that section is what we discussed related, as you recall, there were some discussions about whether we had someone who may contribute to the city, such as we mentioned Massey Rose Foundation. And we also had some discussions regarding some smaller entities that might be wanting to engage in special events who maybe didn't have the funds to really pay the permitting and costs that may be associated with that, and giving the city manager the ability to waive those costs and fees. And so there's a new subsection E that was added, and I'll just read it to you since you don't have it in front of you, but it says, all or a portion of the event permit fees or costs that may be associated with a special event may be waived by the city manager. The decision to waive special event fees and costs is solely within the discretion of the city manager and may not be the basis of any appeal under section 7489, which is the appeal section. So it gives the city manager the ability to waive those fees and leaves that discretion in his office, okay? And the last change is one that was actually made at the workshop, and I gave that to you. Basically, it was adding the penalty clause to the last section of the ordinance. So those are the only changes that were made from what you saw at the workshop itself. So I will open to any questions you may have concerning the ordinance in front of you. I believe we have somebody signed up for
Yes, we do.
public discussion.
I was going to say thanks a lot, Jerry, but I believe that the reason that this last iteration was that way, though, we only have council meetings every so often. We may have something that comes up that in that interim, it does make sense to go ahead and waive that. So it wasn't that I want one more thing to say grace over, but I'll let Jerry speak to all of his reasoning on that, but to have that flexibility for that very reason.
Sure, and that was part of the discussions we had. If you recall, there was, some concerns, especially with these maybe smaller entities that didn't have the sufficient funds to maybe pay some of these costs. They would give the city manager that discretion, and if and when those things come up, then he has the ability to make that judgment call at that time. Also, we cited the Massey Rose Foundation who donated the concession stand, the restrooms at the baseball park, and maybe considering waiving those fees and costs for some kind of donation in that nature. That answer that question?
So I have a couple of questions,
Sure.
very minor. First of all, this is a huge lift and really standardizes things and makes things very fair. So appreciate all the work that went in, that all of you put into it. So my question, while we're talking about these fees, is in the guidelines, there's a statement: a base event permitting fee will be billed to all events, and then we also have the waived one. I was confused by that because there's that statement there, and then also I worry. I got really confused when we're talking about little birthday parties and little, the stuff that's held in the parks.
So if it's a private event in a park, it's not going to require a special event permit, and that's specifically accepted in the ordinance itself.
Yeah. Okay. And then so I was looking at the ordinance, and then I was looking at and I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but they go hand in hand. So that's my question. So the guidelines say private events which are not open to the community will not be allowed on city property. So that kind of threw me for, I don't know, it just seems like a I don't know how they fit together, so help me out.
So say that again, private events that are,
Private events which are not open to the community will not be allowed on city property, and so that was kind of confusing.
so I think, as you recall, in the workshop, there was that discussion of whether or not we're gonna allow any private, closure of roads and those kind of things for private events. I think that's what that's referencing there, and I'll get Jessica to address that when she comes up on the guidelines itself.
So it's really the guidelines that may be.
Maybe, maybe something we can tweak. Again, whether, so let's take these one at a time. So
Sure.
right now, we have the ordinance, and we can discuss any changes that you want to make, any tweaks we want to make, or we can adopt that tonight, and same with the guidelines too. So once Jessica presents that, if there's things that the council sees that needs to be tweaked, when we're discussing the fees, for example, we can bring that back to you at a later date.
Okay, so my question is there anything in the ordinance that that precludes people having small birthday parties and not being, and also that does the ordinance require everybody to get a waiver? So the ordinance is okay in that, right?
Correct, and I'll
Okay.
read from, it says a special event permit, this is under section 74-82B. This is the exceptions to the requirements. Under B5, private events, gatherings, and activities with the attendance of less than 100 people, unless such activity would require the closure of a public street or other city services to be provided. So
right.
if and only, if a street has to be closed, if, Public Works needs to be there, the NPD or whatever may need to be there, only then will a special event permit need to be required. But if you're talking about a birthday party at a city park or something like that, you don't have to go get a special event permit to do that.
Okay, I just wanted to be
Does
sure.
that make that clear?
And again, I think the intent was, and I'll let Jessica speak to a little bit more detail, whether you had a wedding or a birthday party shutting down a street, or someone rents basically for a private party, all of Festival Park, and then it's not open to the public. So that was the intent. And also, in a perfect world, that people will use some of our other facilities that are more scaled to some of that. So rather than take, let's say, all of Festival Park and say, I've rented it, not have that as an option for a non-public event, but then, okay, we've got the pavilion options for those type of events.
So our parks are public facilities, and they should maintain that way. They don't become private facilities for somebody who wants to rent them out for their entirety, as Rick was talking about there. Does that answer your question?
Right, I had thought, because I had read the ordinance and then I read
Sure.
and I think what you said during the workshop, it was great. We may have to tweak it later on when we see something happening. We may have to.
Sure.
And so my questions, I think, are more, and I think it's easier to tweak the guidelines later on than it is to actually adopt ordinances.
A lot easier
and-
to tweak guidelines or policies
Right,
than ordinances.
right.
That's
So,
for sure.
so those were my only questions. Thank you for answering them.
Any other questions?
I think somebody signed up.
Yeah. Ann? Just take it to her, Rhonda. That's okay. We'll come to you.
Yeah, you can use this. This will work.
Thank you, Mike,
Yep.
thank you. I'm Ann Keenan, I live at 609 Hospital Street, and I don't know the difference between the ordinance and the guidelines, and so I was kind of waiting to hear Jessica speak, but apparently we're going to vote on the ordinance. The reason I wanted to speak was because I read a little bit about this in the paper, but and I remember this happened when there was going to be a wedding on downtown, and somebody wanted to close off the street for their wedding and have the area in front of the restaurant there, and everyone thought that was a good idea. I just wanted to have a little discussion about this to see what the public thought, if there was anybody in town or organizations that were going to be affected by this, and have a I'd like to hear what Jessica explains all the details of it.
Yeah, and as Ann said, I think Jessica can clarify those, but of course, as you know, the ordinance is going to give you the rulemaking ability, the authority by which the city council is authorizing the city to implement fees, for example, under this. And the guidelines are going to be more detailed in nature. They're going to go into more specificity with regard, the ordinances is going to kind of give you the overarching framework of what gives the city and its staff and its departments the authority to carry out these tasks that the council assigns it through the ordinance. The guidelines and the policies are going to really get into the details, minutia of these things.
Yeah.
Does that answer that question?
Yeah. And I'll tell you, now, we've already approved that, but before, we didn't have an ordinance. We didn't have any guidelines. We didn't have anything. That's exactly why we're doing this right now. We are bound by our vote that we took, that young lady and that gentleman are going to have their wedding whenever. I don't know when it is, but after that, there will be a set of guidelines, rules, regulations on how you go about that. So.
Any other questions?
Okay, who does Jessica come up here?
Or leave for the next one.
Okay, all right. Okay, all right, okay. Any other questions? I'll entertain a motion.
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we approve, we adopt the ordinance of the City of Nacogdoches, amending Chapter 74 Parks and Recreation, adding Article 4 Special Events of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Nacogdoches, Texas, providing a severability clause, providing a continuation clause, providing a repeal clause, and providing an effective date.
Second.
Okay, well, motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Next item, item 6E, discuss and consider adoption of the proposed City of Nacogdoches special event guidelines and special event fee structure. Jessica.
Mayor, Council, Jessica Sal, Community Services Director. Before I start my presentation, I wanted to answer a few of the questions because y'all made it sound like Jessica has all the answers. I'm not sure I do, but I'm happy to answer those. Ms. Bellinger, as you brought up, birthday parties at like Pecan Park, things like that will not be precluded by the ordinance or the special event permitting. Right now, we try to do a good job of telling our public, if you are renting a pavilion for your child's birthday, you're not renting the whole park. You are renting that pavilion and getting the city services that are already there. The electricity is on. There are empty trash cans that we have someone come to most parks every single day of the week. So you get the trash receptacles that are there, the water that is turned on, and the electricity, but you don't get additional city services for your child's birthday party. So nothing in our guidelines or ordinances would stop anything like that. This would just be for public events that are either wanting to close down the park, which was the intention of not allowing private events, because it's very hard to stop people from actually using your public parks if it's for a private function. So I just wanted to answer that before we got started. So today's item, I'm assuming that we'll spend the majority of our conversation talking about event permit fees, but I wanted to give a quick recap from our work session on February 12th. As you all know, we went over those event permitting guidelines. They're roughly 12 pages. They get down in the nitty-gritty of event type, event size, what the city staff needs from our community event organizers, goes into things like insurance, what our fire marshal says is required, depending on if you're having fireworks, really touches on pretty much everything you would need to know to host a successful event in Nacogdoches. Our intent with bringing this ordinance and these event guidelines to City Council for approval is so our community can understand what we need from them and what we can offer to them as well. We want people to have these guidelines in front of them, so if you want to start a brand new tourism-based event in Nacogdoches, you kind of have your starter guide. So we want that to be transparent. The intent is once this is approved by City Councils to have it on the website. We'll have our event permitting guidelines on the website along with any presentations, and then also our form that they must fill out. So we went through a lot of these items, had a 2-hour discussion, which I really appreciate all of your very thoughtful responses to that. It helped make some of these edits. I will mention we did make a few edits based on our council feedback to the guidelines. Most of them were a few grammatical mistakes we found, a few clarifications. One of them was adding a section to the back with proposed fees. I will mention that is the only new section in these ordinance, or in these guidelines. We also changed some wording related to security at the request of Nacogdoches Police Department. In the former iteration of this, the way it read made it sound like you could go out and hire whatever security company you wanted, and that was not our intent. From an event organizer standpoint, if there's security needed, they will work directly with Nacogdoches Police Department, and then Nacogdoches Police Department, if they need extra officers, will work with NISD, SFA, Sheriff's Office, or whoever they deem appropriate, but our event organizers will just deal with our police department, just to make sure that is very streamlined and we have the right people in there working security. Also, we changed the wording to prohibit those truly private events. Does not affect the wedding that's happening next Saturday. So this would prohibit people from shutting down city streets for weddings, funerals, birthday parties, where we're expected to keep the public out, because that's just not something sustainable from our police department, fire department, or city staff. And then we also added some wording that was requested about wayfinding signage and the appropriate place for that, reminding all of our event organizers that whether or not these things are listed in the event permitting guidelines, they must follow all city laws, all of our other ordinances, and all state laws. And then also reminding them about trash pickup on parade and running routes. So those items were added in there. The biggest item and the biggest change was our draft event fees. Oh, goodness gracious. Was our draft event fees. When I spoke to council on February 12th, we kind of had a few different options for event permitting philosophies, and the request back to staff was come up with some numbers so we can discuss from there. So after that meeting, we had a working group from Parks, Main Street, Convention and Visitors Bureau, Public Works, Fire, and Police, all came back together to discuss what we thought was the most appropriate starting place. It became more and more apparent the more we talked is that we don't all collect all of our event data the same way. Some of our departments are tracking purely overtime worked at the event. Some departments were tracking all of the staff time we spent preparing for the event. Some tracked the wear and tear on vehicles and what that cost, but it was a little bit different for each department. So what we came up with was these draft fees and then the intent to track our event expenditures the same way, using the same form for the next calendar year, and then come back to council with a truly in-line representation of what the city of Nacogdoches is spending on special events, to make sure we're not comparing apples to oranges to bananas on the city side, but to make sure that we are capturing all that information the same way. But as of right now, these event permitting fees, we have some base permit fees, which would be a small event would pay $100, a large event would pay $250, and then depending on what additional things they're wanting to do at their event, they would add those additional fees to it. So if you were a small event having alcohol, you would pay $150. And then you could kind of mix and match like an a la carte menu. We also have street closure fees, just because that takes a lot of manpower, dropping off barricades, putting bollards in place, putting up signage. And then also, if you're closing down East Main Street, it's a lot of extra administrative costs because we are coming to council to present a resolution, then going to TxDOT, presenting insurance, and doing a lot of administrative things. Also security, we put that in there so that the event organizer will work directly with NACPD to determine their security needs. Every once in a while we have an event that checks off the box saying, no, I do not need security, but they may be a 10,000 person event with alcohol and they're crossing a bunch of streets. So in that case, they do need security just for the safety of people attending the event and people that are just operating around the event. And then park pavilion rental, that really happens mainly if people are doing events downtown that include Festival Park. We do have to rent that pavilion because we do tell people it's first come, first serve unless there's a large event. So we reserve that pavilion for them. It's a $50 cost. And most of our events are hosted by 501c3 nonprofits, and so they get that fee waived. But we do have to have them go through the registration just so we have it marked off in our system. And just for our discussion's sake, my staff went through and looked at the current events that we usually host to see some projected fees, if council approved these, what they would be charged. So just for conversation's sake, Blueberry Festival, if they decided to do the same format they have for the last 10 years, their potential fee would be about $350. Old Town Rigdown would be about $400. We have things like the Nacogdoches Half Marathon would be about a $200 fee, and the Multicultural 5K would be $100. And so these are more administrative fees. They do not count any overtime because the intent is to come back to council in about a year with that discussion on here's how much overtime the city is paying for its employees to work these events, and then have that discussion on whether or not those are passed on to the event organizer, or if that's something that you direct staff to put it into our normal operating budget. But since we don't have consistent costs across the board, we thought these administrative fees were the way to go for now.
Jessica, why would Old Town Rigdown be more than Blueberry?
Because they have alcohol.
Okay.
So that would be the additional $50.
And Jessica, in terms, and I've been kind of quiet, kind of non-comedic, how much money could we raise if we charge for how many cups end up in front of Brad's house? Like per cup fee?
I mean, I'm sure we could do it if there was.
We might actually found a profit center, Brad.
I had just said this was a very happy council meeting, and you blew it.
I just want to note I didn't say that.
My address is,
We all know you.
And your
yeah,
Zella
we all know
account.
it.
So this is the proposal from staff as of right now. And so, of course, we do need some more direction from council on if you are good with the additions we've made to the guidelines, or if you think they need more tweaking, feedback on the proposed fees, and then if you like the fees and would like to move forward, kind of an implementation timeline. My personal suggestion would be to have those happen October 1 with the rest of our budget year, so that way we can communicate with all of our event partners, which we've been in touch with many of them right now, or so far, to let them know these fees are coming, here's where you can find all the information. If there's a lot of questions from our event partners, we're happy to host a meeting over at the Recreation Center to walk them through the new permit. And so that gives us time to talk to everybody before these fees hit them.
So is there any way to waive, like Old Town Rigdown brings in, donates, $250,000 to us, and we want to charge them $450 to get here? Do you have the right to waive that, or is it me?
It's Rick.
Okay.
Our city, and the way Mr. Baker's written it into ordinance is that the city manager has the option to waive any of those fees.
Any of them? Okay.
Yes, and so if Old Town Rigdown came to us and said, we want to do this, but we'd like to request a waiver because we intend on donating to another city department, project, something that's good for the community, they would request that in writing, we would pass it along to the city manager, who has the option to say, yes.
I mean, they donated over 200,000 this last go-around, with 50,000 just towards the concession stands at the ball fields and the restrooms.
But they ended up doing the whole concession
Correct.
stand,
They
which
did the
was
whole
$200,000.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I don't think the fees are a big deal. I think what is hurting the city, of course, you go with, you've got two things. You've got revenue incoming, and you've got expenses outgoing, okay?
Yes.
And we talked about this in budget. Our revenue is decreasing for several reasons. Okay, but like, just for example, and I'm not picking on anybody, but Blueberry, okay? I think the cost of Blueberry cost the city about $20,000. Is that correct?
Yes, and like I mentioned, we don't all the departments don't track the same, so 20,000 is what we have. I don't know if it's fully accurate, it may be more than that.
Right.
But that's what the number we have.
And with that, you have to also remember, not just our PD, but many PDs have as people are aging out, a retention recruitment. You'll also raise the starting salaries, so everything pre-COVID in terms of cost versus what it's going to cost for OT today it's more everywhere. And it's nobody's fault, it's just what is. So that's kind of why it's went up so much in the last, didn't it double in the last 5 years?
Probably.
I think our analysis had that the OT for events like that have effectively doubled, at least on your larger, in the last maybe 3 years even.
So that's why I'm saying the fee is not a big deal. It's going to be, how long are we going to be able to continue with our revenue the way it is right now? Bearing that cost, and I know they're bringing a lot of people to town, and they're spending money, but the lady at CVB, what's her name?
Kelly?
No, Ashley. Yeah, Ashley, I'm
Ashley,
sorry.
oh, Ashley.
she said, you know, heads and beds for both of those events are are minimal, you know, so we're not getting any hot tax on that either, so.
And I think, oh, sorry.
So wasn't there some discussion of adding on when it actually costs us to provide? I think we discussed that. Is that included in this structure?
As far as when we provide, like security and things like that?
Yeah, security, but also if we have to get our public works staff to come out and do, you know, a lot of work. I mean, whatever isn't included in that $20,000.
And as of right now.
I think that's what you're referring to. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, and as of right now with these blanket fees, it would be, just for argument's sake, Blueberry Festival would be $350, and then if the NAC Police Department decided we need 20 officers and we're having to hire them from somewhere else, so we need you to cover their time, it would be that $350 in administrative fees plus other security fees that would be paid to NAC Police Department.
So you might want to make that clearer, that we may charge other, you know, other fees based on the cost incurred by the city. And you can give examples. That might help, don't you think?
Well,
Or-
one of the things, so when you do have to go to the SO or other agencies to work these events, that's a cost that we have, not just eat, we would eat normally in OT. That would be one that we actually then, that's a more direct cost to us. So even if you just moved that needle where anyone from outside agencies was the first step, charging, or maybe covering just the OT difference or some kind of delta, even if it's only half of the OT, that would probably be an improvement. But to your question, now if, let's just think theoreticals, with some of the uncertainties, I won't speak to all of them, but there's just a few of them out there right now. If people are pulling back on discretionary spending, and then that affects sales tax, and then that affects our general fund, then yes, this is where y'all get the big bucks again, Brad. At a point, we're going to have to make some decisions, or that means if we eat all these costs, let's say they double again in the next year or next 18 months, then, you know, what's going to be foregone instead? Do we buy case one less? I don't know. There's got to be a trailer or something that he'll come with. So those are the decisions at some point.
So back to, it may be that we need to have another section. I know, I was just thinking about this. I remember Carrie Walker talking about the costs that they incur just in public works. But you may want to put, because all of this talks about a security cost, but there are other significant costs that we incur. And you might want to put a paragraph that any costs that we incur, including, and you might give wording to it, Mr. Beverland, but, you know, all the different, whatever came up to that $20,000 that the city may charge for those services. And again, any of those costs can be waived by the city manager if he agrees.
And one of the things that came up, excuse me, in our staff working group after that was when we looked at across the board how we all track that overtime, it was, excuse me, there wasn't a clear consensus on how we asked for that to be reimbursed, if it's full reimbursement, if it's 10% goes to the event organizer, and that's why the staff's recommendation was, let's fully track all this, see what we're actually spending, and come back in a year to council to then have that discussion on, do we want to put it in the normal budget? Do we want to pass on 10% of our overtime to the event organizer? Do we want full reimbursement? We can certainly speed up that timeline to try to figure out, you know, in 6 months, fully track.
We do think we should, let's just say this, we should budget actuals for y'all's purposes. And I think, in fairness to others, even if we're taking a hit for a little longer, they need to build their budget too. So we need to give them enough of a heads up that these costs may be coming, because they're operating under their current budget as well. And they may not have budgeted for it, even though we've historically never budgeted for it. But I think the first step is definitely structure, then track the actual budget, and then include that in this next fiscal year's budget. And then if we need to then, and some of them won't be on the same fiscal year as us. Some of them are going to be on a calendar year. It all depends on the entity, but aren't most of them on a calendar year?
Most of them.
So if we kind of knew where we would fall, what our budget would need to be, we could hopefully give them at least a quarter of a year heads up before it's coming.
Well, if you don't start this until October 1st, you've already had your large events are already done, aren't they? And
But we're tracking,
half
but we can't track them, though.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we can go ahead and start tracking those expenses without charging any event organizers right now.
Right,
And by
actually.
October, we will have about half of our large events will be done.
Okay, when's Old Town Rig
Old
Down?
Town Rig Down is in September. We
Yeah.
have the Christmas Parade, which is one of our largest ones, which will be later on in November.
Right, okay.
So we'll have Blueberry, and then the Bluegrass Festival has moved locations, so it won't be in a downtown or on a city property. So we won't have that one to track. But we will have Blueberry Festival, a few other smaller ones, plus some marathons and 5Ks, and Old Town Rig Down by
And you'll
October.
track actual.
And I know with Ashley being here, the other thing we could do, I know she's got her Placer AI. But what we probably could align with that is have her try to track that and the hotel receipts, and also make sure there's enough of a deep dive that if there is a delta in there that we're not catching, that we truly say, okay, you're having Blueberry, but nobody shows up to stay in the hotel. That we really need to three-dimensionally look at this and make sure that part of it couldn't be slightly offset before we just say, no, it's just got to be general fund. And the only reason I'll say that, having Kemah, Galveston twice, when you've got a certain amount of load of events in certain parts of the year, sometimes it's also hard to distinguish, okay, that if you have too many events in the same time frame, it's hard to tell why people are in town. It doesn't mean you have zero. Are they in town for that? Or are they in town for another event at SFA? So, or is one masking the reason the other appears to not have as much of a bump? I have seen cities, unfortunately, have events and spend, I won't say which one or two, actually I can think of two, where, they'll spend $50,000 in hot tax and they'll get 2 or 3 or 5 net hotel stays, that's not a good thing either. So, but I think we do need to be as we develop this, we need to be as sophisticated as we can with the tools we have, so we don't just push all the burden onto them if we don't need to.
Have you had discussions with the people that actually are doing the Blueberry Festival?
After our city council work session, we did talk to Kelly over at the chamber that was asking when these fees would come about, just wanted kind of a heads up. We did tell her in all likelihood we wouldn't have them on the books to charge Blueberry Festival this year. And of course, we've already started the planning, so our staff's intent is not to start the planning with them and then go back and slap some new fees on them. So we did tell her, what we were proposing, what was likely going to come about, and she just wanted some information. And
Well, were they for it, against it, shocked, surprised?
I think she really just wanted information, didn't sound angry on the phone, and didn't express, complete hate for any of this, but also didn't say fully in support. But just wanted some information. We told her where to find the workshop, and she said she was going to go finish watching it.
So, we already know about the events we anticipate that we're working toward. What if, Pickleball USA decided to come in to town, and I know you're so in favor of that, Mr. Beverly, but let me finish my question. And there were significant costs that were incurred that were not normal in these base permitting fees. Would we have the capacity? The reason I'm suggesting maybe a placeholder, vague, wording so that you could recoup, serious fees. Would we, under this fee structure, be able to charge them the extra $5,000 for the, whatever?
As of right now, with how it's presented today, no. Pickleball, I will mention, it's a little bit of a horse of a different
okay.
color.
Well,
Because
call
they
it
have their
something
own rental fee structure for that one, since they have to rent our courts. But no, so as of right now, if there was some event that we don't know about that came in and there were city
huge
services
cost.
that were needed that were completely out of the realm of what we typically do, we don't have wording in there saying you may be charged other things. We can certainly put that in there, and then, of course, we would work with Mr. Baker to make sure that we are legally charging people rather than, my only fear would be to put a blanket statement and then tell someone, well, your event's going to be actually $5,000, even though it's not written in here. But I think we could come up with some wording letting people know that there may be additional cost incurred
Right.
if it's outside of this scope.
Yeah, or you don't have to have it here. I mean, there's no reason for the city to lose money on some of these. Mr. Beverly, I know you're ready to, I hope it's not a joke, is it?
That's all I got right now. I'm not going to say a thing.
Okay, that's right.
But I think we can put that wording in.
So, okay, so I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead.
So I have about 4 or 5, none of these are principles. They're just clarifications, and I can either hand them to you. I'm again, all events will be required to pay a base permitting fee. And it says in here, all events requiring the use of city services or occurring on city property have to get an event permit. Do these little, I mean, to me, it's sort of, I can't wrap my head around the birthday party thing that, I'm going to go and on the park and just, do I have to come and get a permit thing from you when my
Well,
family?
I do think, and Jessica can speak to that, I think we've had birthday parties that then try to occupy, you've even had birthday parties where you have to have street closures effectively, right?
Yes, so, and I should have mentioned, on the other side of this, city staff is also working on some park policies that will be brought forward a little bit later as far as what types of activities we do in certain parks. For a long time, people could rent Festival Park Pavilion for a birthday party with 30 people. And because we have 2 streets running through that park, we were closing down the streets just for safety because we didn't want any children running in the street. It created quite the headache on staff side, and some confusion and anger from the public because it looks like nobody's down in Festival Park and we just shut down the streets. So there will be certain activities that don't happen in certain parks anymore that are reserved specifically for public events, and we're going to work with the public to find a more appropriate place for their child's birthday party, which is.
And Jessica, didn't you also have a few instances where others showed up to the park and are like, hey, why can't I be here?
Yeah.
Those scenarios too.
Yes, you've had that.
All I'm saying is I've found about 4 places where I was confused, and I asked some other people, what does this mean? And they go, well, that means I can't ever use that park again for my birthday party. And I go, I don't think that's what they're intending. And so if we could, I can hand you my document, and if you can look, it's just I think some wordsmithing, and you can see my questions. And I didn't have time to give it to you ahead of time, or I would have done it. But I just think, I think looking at that, and then I still want to have a placeholder so we're not caught, until October 1st with charges. We may want to have the event and we may want to have the opportunity to charge people the real cost. So I don't know.
And I'm happy to look at those, especially if it's something where we can clarify with people so they understand that you still can use our parks, but certain events go in certain parks. So I'm happy to include those.
Any other questions?
I have a few. I'll try and be as brief as I can. Do we have any kind of estimate at the amount of revenue that these fees that you're proposing would generate for us?
My estimate would be right at or under about $5,000 a year.
Okay, so on a budget of our general fund, we're not talking a significant amount of funds.
No, sir.
So that moves me to my second question, and that is, do we know, particularly for these events, how many events would be prevented from happening? And I know the city manager has the authority under the ordinance we just passed. Do we have data on what events we might lose because we're doing the fees?
I do not have data on that. And there may be some. We would try our best to work with those organizations. I will say a lot of our organizations in town that host events are 501c3 nonprofits. So there are a few that we can waive some fees anyway, like for that park pavilion rental and use of a city building, because council has approved that, I believe, 2 years ago. So we do have those in place. And then, of course, we are happy to take those other requests to the city manager in order to waive those fees. But I don't have numbers on how many we would lose.
I certainly am glad we're having this discussion about how do we manage what it costs to put on events in the city. But I want us to be cautious about trying to recoup all of the cost right now, because number one, we don't know how much across the city that we are actually losing. And I don't want us to get into a position where we are having events that don't happen because there was some unintended fee and now they have to pay it. So I'm not necessarily hesitant on the administrative fees, but I think your suggestion that we wait until at least October to institute a broader fee, I think is wise.
Agree with it. And it wouldn't necessarily be another fee. It would be the actual cost of what it costs the city as far as labor and equipment or whatever, to pay for that, to clean up for the event.
And right
And
now, we
security.
have no idea what that would cost
And
someone.
I am all for it. Don't put it on them now because we don't have any numbers. But if we track this through the rest of the year, next year, and we let them know soon enough, they can put it in their budget that, look, this is what it cost us last year. So expect to pay
And,
at least this.
and I know Ashley will say, don't say that, Rick. But let's say we track it and something generates 20 hotel rooms, then I think some argument could be made for a delta in there towards the event. Budget obviously has to be taken into account that they could use on, it's typically advertising, where they're able to advertise. So you push more heads in beds with that event. So that might be something that could be an offset. So if we do see those things in the numbers, that would be another thing. So I think getting all your actuals are critical. What does it really cost you on when Parks and Public Works and their crews are out, PD, other agencies that have to be brought in to assist with PD, and then also what the real, if we can pull out, if there's 3 events happening in the same weekend, obviously sometimes that can blur things. If there's a sporting event that overlaps, but if it's very discrete, it should be pretty easy to tell if there's a bump.
This is not anything new as far as cities are concerned. I mean, we're just now getting around to doing this. So this is not like, this is something that's just happened. I mean, there's cities all across the state of Texas and probably the nation that have fees much larger than this, and the cities don't absorb the cost of putting on these events.
Well, I can tell you at one city I was at, we budgeted not only for direct amounts of hotel motel for city sponsorship of events that they'd use for advertising, we would also budget a portion for some of those additional costs, and that was hitting that. But we even had an opinion of council that, given the size of that city and the number of events and visitation, it wasn't a big reach to be able to use that for additional PD costs, for example. So, no, but we did budget for it, though.
Yep.
We built it in, so it wasn't an unknown cost hitting the general fund every year where you've got 100,000, like you said. Could be easily 100,000 of kind of hidden costs hitting the general fund. And at a point that has to probably, especially in leaner times, has to be accounted for.
All of this seems a little premature to me, like we don't have the actuals numbers on it. I don't understand quite why we're passing this right now when it's a lot of, I don't know. We won't know until next year.
Well, what you're passing is some front-end structure. The bigger pieces, when you get down, what did you call it? A la carte?
Yes.
Something fancy.
Poo-poo
I feel like I'm dining. Still trying to figure out which of the forks to use first on my salad. So that would come over the tracking over the balance of the year. The larger costs. These are nominal fees, really, in the grand scheme of things. These should not shut everybody down. And if that comes up, that's where we would look at the waiver issue.
In some of these, the intent was to have administrative fees up front so we could have some buy-in from some community events. We have had in the past where events want to be hosted on City of Nacogdoches property, use city services, and we can't get them to call us back. And then they want to show up 2 days beforehand and say, well, I'm having an event here, and we haven't been able to get a hold of them. So this will help us put in place some new event permitting software. It will free up some of our staff time to that way we don't have to have a 7 to 10 person staff meeting to approve every single event. Because without some sort of structure, which is in that event permitting guidelines, right now we are meeting for every single event. And for city staff who are tasked with many different jobs, it takes up a lot of time and spends a lot of city resources if we have meetings with 10 people right now. This will help us streamline it. It will also help the community have some buy-in to these events to make sure that, we are properly communicating with them and they're responding back to us to make sure that we can have safe and profitable and, great community events. So this was not an intent to recoup a lot of costs. That could come later after we track a full year or in October, whenever council would like to hear it again. And then those potentially much bigger costs could come into effect, or council could decide we don't want to recoup any of that. Please budget for it in your individual departments or pass on a certain percentage. So I think those bigger fees would come later after we have the data to back it up. Right now, this was just the intent to have some administrative fees up front.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, I still have the one question, which is, if somebody from out of town came and wanted to hold an event tomorrow, never held anything in Nacogdoches before, wanted to hold an event, and you look at what they're going to do and you think it's going to cost the city $10,000, do we have, under this structure, do we have are we able to say, no, we don't want to hold it because it's going to cost us $10,000? Or will we be able to say, we'd love to hold it, but it's going to cost us $10,000 and we want you to pay it? That's my question. Not any of the things, not Blueberry, nothing we have. So what do we do right now? What will happen?
So as of right now, if Company A comes in and says, I want to have a crawfish festival, because I would love for that to happen. If they come in and say, I want to have that in downtown, they have to meet the same event guidelines that are written out for everybody else. Same thing the Blueberry Festival adheres to. Have to have the proper insurance. If they know they're going to have a certain number of people, we could come to council to request to shut down certain streets. So they would have to go through the same process as everyone else. But right now, we do not have anything where we could look at them and say, it's going to cost us $10,000 and we don't think we're going to make money, so you're denied. So we don't have that.
So you
currently.
can't deny them. It'll cost us $10,000?
Correct. As long as they meet all of our event permitting guidelines. If they come in and say, well, I'm not getting, your standard insurance policy, we can deny based on that. If they are not willing to pay for any security, if they're not willing to help, excuse me, to come to a logistics meeting, we can deny based on those things. But we can't deny based on the city is going to put out too much money.
So my question, I guess, is for Jerry then. Jerry, is there some way we can we put something, a placeholder in our policies and procedures? I don't want to lose $10,000. I don't want to lose $20,000. I mean, I understand we're going to be having to go through and test out and figure out how much money it's going to cost, but, especially the big city, somebody's coming in from Galveston,
Well,
one of these, or
we didn't have any
Kena.
structure. That is why we're going through this, is to start
Right.
putting the structure together. Actually mentioned all those different things, and yes, I'm sure I know people that would come in and do some of those different festivals
That's right.
statewide, but that's exactly why we really need to have the structure in place. Now, sometimes you can also try to recruit people like that, but that's usually in a very planned manner, working with the CVB, between Jessica's shop and the CVB to do just that. But I do think that scenario you're mentioning is kind of why we're going through this exercise too, is if something pops up and there it is, it's going to be a cost.
So
Well, I think we have to treat all applicants equally. So unless, one of the applicant that you're mentioning in your scenario, I don't think a financial cost to the city is one reason to deny them. If we can't deny that for Blueberry Festival, for example, or any other festival that's currently going on in this, in the city, if that's not a basis for denying them, I don't see how we could deny a new applicant on that same basis.
And we can't charge them for those services either, right?
Well, right now, we don't have anything in our current guidelines that
Okay.
establishes what those
So-
costs are until we do that.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
I think we're just
wanted
going to
be
have to
sure.
wait till we get actual numbers on cost. And then nail it down and go from there. There's nothing we can do about it. We've waited
300 years.
300 years, and now we're talking about it right now, so we can wait another 6
300.
months and figure it out.
So my other question is it possible to go ahead and pass this with allowing you to tweak some wording changes for clarification on some of those? I'm okay with that.
I believe we could, and Jerry can correct me if I'm wrong, could we do the special event guidelines and then bring the fee structure back for?
I think the fee structure's fine.
Oh,
I mean, it's just the guidelines that had some questions, so.
I mean, if you have specific tweaks that we could, put into the record right now, have those, otherwise, I think it'd probably be best to just bring that back at a future meeting with those tweaks in it. But if you're good with what's presented right now as a council, you can approve it. It can always be amended. These are just guidelines again. So there will be, I mean, we've already talking about a 6-month period where we're going to evaluate things. It may be the terms of the guidelines. We need to be part of that evaluation process. So that could be tweaked at that time too. So.
Well, the only thing I thought was really confusing was whether everybody had to pay a fee, because it seemed like everybody has to pay some kind of fee if they're going to use public property. That was the statement in there. I don't have it anymore. And I'm happy to do whatever, any way y'all want to do it. But I worry I don't want every single person who uses the park to have to pay a fee. And so.
Okay, we have any more discussion from the council? No. Okay. Bridget?
Hi, Council. Hello. Can you hear me? Okay, cool. Hi, Council. I'm Bridget. I live at 411 Richardson Street. I live in Mr. Williams' ward. I wanted to express support for this today. I think it's really important for community organizers to have this kind of protocol to follow. A checklist is really awesome. I posted many events downtown in Festival Park myself, or co-hosted or co-organized. I've helped with Dia de los Muertos. I've helped with Summer Squash. I've helped with Art Fest multiple years. So I think the things, I do want to say first the things that I enjoy about this, because there's a lot. I think I've noticed lost child and first aid tents. That is so important. Like, we need to have a place that kids can go, especially at Festival Park. If it's a big event, they're running around, they get lost, they need to have a place to go, and their parents can go as well. First aid tents, I agree. That's also really important. I love a checklist. I'm a checklist person. I think it's really fantastic that we have a checklist to follow when we're organizing events. That makes things way more accessible for new organizers or people that are assisting organizers that have experience, that I can just pass someone a checklist and be like, hey, do we have all this stuff before a meeting? It's very helpful. Love insurance policy explanations. A lot of people get scared when they see $1 million. They're like, oh my gosh, how much is that going to cost? It's really not that expensive, and it does a lot for both the city, for the attendees, and for the organizers. Security is fantastic too. At Summer Squash, we would not have been able to have a successful event without our security. They literally kept children from running into the creek, so I love them for that. There are a few things that I think need addressed before this goes forward, in my opinion, and I just wanted to address them with y'all. And then also, if anyone can answer my questions, I would love that as well. So on page 4 of this submitted guidelines, there's a note about sound equipment permit. I would like to see, or application, I would like to see that sound equipment application. I think when this is being submitted, I'd like to see any application associated with it to be submitted as well. It just helps me as an organizer to know what to expect and to be able to be in favor of something like this. On page 7, I want to be specific with y'all so I don't get confusing. Okay, under additional festival/vendor guidelines, it's bullet point 3. It says a vendor list with signed application should be submitted to city event staff no later than 14 days before the event. So as someone that hosts a lot of art fairs, I think it's really important to kind of explain what they mean by that. Is this vendor application going to be, provided by the city? Like, are we going to have to give the city's vendor application to our vendors, like, asking for sales tax permit, stuff like that? That's fine. I just want to see it, I guess, is what I'm trying to have some clarification on. And then signatures. So the way that our events, when I host events, works is that we have Google Forms. People fill out Google Forms, so there's not really a signature required. Just kind of want a clarification on that because we never get signatures from vendors, and usually several drop out day of event anyway. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is security. So like I said, security is really important. You need security, especially at big events. It protects children. I mean, barricades are essential. You don't want anyone driving through the festival or show or event, like hurting people. We need that. I do think that we need transparent fees and costs per officer or hourly or whatever their off-duty overtime cost is listed on this. It's really important just so we can budget and be able to prepare adequately for our events. So I just wanted to bring that up. I think that everything else looks fine. I do want to say that I do appreciate you, Chad, for talking about, what events are we going to lose if we pass this, if we start charging folks so much money that they can't host events. That's a very valid point, and I really appreciate that. Summer Squash operated on less than $10,000. We had plenty of volunteers to help. That made it more affordable. Art Fest, we don't want to raise our vendor fees higher than they already are. Artists are usually just trying to get by. So I just think that's really important to consider. But anyway, thank you all so much.
Okay, can you answer any of her questions?
I circled the bullet points. That was very helpful. Thank you for saying the page number. So on page 4, as far as festival using sound equipment, and I believe Mr. Baker can speak to this as well, that is something that will come before council as far as sound amplification. The intent is not to stop event organizers from, having a band or anything like that, but having that permit in there will also help us understand how loud it's going to be to make sure it falls within our ordinance. And that's something that is forthcoming to city council. And I know Mr. Baker can add a little bit more to that. But quickly on to page 7, which is about a vendor list. So our intent is not to provide any sort of vendor application to organizers. Whatever vendor permit or whatever vendor form they're using right now is perfectly fine. What we are looking for is either copies of all of the signed applications or purely an Excel sheet that says here is the 60 people that have booths at a downtown event. A lot of that is for safety. So that way, if something happens, we can make contact with all of those people. If there's a bad weather event, also if there is some kind of damage or we had one person that was like, I want to cook on an open flame. And we told them no for that specific event because of where they were, and they did it anyway. And so some of that is so we know who is in that vendor spot, and so we can communicate with the event organizer that, your vendor in this spot didn't follow this, which could mean you don't get to have your event again, but we would really like you to not invite them back. If there was any sort of illegal activity, we could then figure out who was doing what. So really that, and it doesn't have to be physically signed. It could be an Excel sheet with just the contact information. So that's why that request was there.
And Jessica, I hate to bring this up. Now, in one location, because we had a high frequency of events, and we also had issues, tents. We also had wind that would come up. I won't say which one, but you can probably guess. It could be a couple. So the fire marshal's office was also critical in terms of the ability. We even got down with one event that probably had in one day probably 30,000 people at it. They were ready to shut it down right then and there. Reason being, the vendor didn't want to comply with some things. They finally did, but you're talking about open flames. You're talking about cooking en masse. You're talking about a lot of tents, a lot of people, and also a lot of potential for choke points of humanity where you had a whole lot of people in a small area too. So I do think that not only with PD, but also the fire marshal's office and the building official also did a walkthrough with it. It's not to go too far with it, but everything down to, if you're cooking with oil, where's the fire extinguisher? Do you have the right type? Is it in proximity to a tent? There's a lot of logistics that go into these, and the more complicated they get, you do get into some safety issues. So I don't know if we have everything in there that we could run through, but this is the first structure. It probably wouldn't hurt for, at the end of the day, to have building, fire marshal, PD, rerun back through everything too. But I think for a base structure, it's going to be better than what we've had. I'll give it that much. But we do need to put some meat on the bones to this over time, and we do need numbers to be able to charge people or waive, depending on the situation. I do think you can get some large events that can come at you under the auspices also of a nonprofit. They'll find a nonprofit to attach to, and they're actually like they're really kind of a for-profit, nonprofit model. I've seen that too, where they will come in and they will rotate between other locations. There are folks involved, make plenty of money, but they'll have some kind of link to a nonprofit, and they'll make a $10,000 donation maybe to the VFW or something like that, then go to the next place and do the same thing. They may net $200,000 or something on the exercise. So something to think through too. We're just getting started, but the intent is not to diminish or any of the events that are happening. If it's to add some structure, because like you said, someone could just show up, and then also over time, we don't even know. Are we spending $150,000 right now? Are we spending 100? Are we spending 80? We should budget for that even as a first step.
And I will mention also on the police overtime, we can certainly put in the general overtime rate. Maybe not, here's how much to expect for your event, but a police overtime rate is X amount, and we can work with the police department to put that in there for some more transparency.
We have one more, Ann.
I have nothing left to
Okay, okay. All right, okay. You need a motion?
So that is up to council. If these are good as is and the fees are good as is, you can make a motion to adopt today. If we want to do those few edits that Ms. Ballinger brought up and put a little bit of wording in there about, we could charge additional fees on this fee structure, we can certainly bring that back if you think it needs more edits.
I'm okay to pass it now, but I wish you would look at it over the next month and see where the confusion is, and then bring it back if you need to tweak it. I mean, I think it'll need some tweaks, but you can bring it back as soon as you tweak it. If you want to pass it now, I'm good with that.
And one more question before you make any motions, if that's okay.
I'm fixing to make a motion.
I just have one quick question, I promise.
I was going to make them.
As far as fee implementation, is it the desire of council to have those fees start, within the next month for anybody applying for new ones? Because it will take some time for us to work with finance on the back end to create that fee structure in our system. But we could start charging these administrative fees within the next month for any new applications. We wouldn't get retroactive.
I would say new applications, yes.
Okay.
Applications you already have, no, don't change anything right now. I think we need to be fair, but new applications going forward, if it passes. I'm fixing to
Okay.
make a motion.
Oh, I was going to make it.
So you make it, Kathleen.
Okay. I make the motion that we adopt the special event guidelines, and beginning when? Beginning now, immediately?
As far as the fees?
The guidelines.
Oh, yes.
Starting immediately in the special event fee structure for all new applicants.
Second.
Motion is,
Just one question.
Good. Discussion.
So if we're saying that this is going into effect now, the ordinance won't go into effect for 10 days, right?
That's correct.
All right.
So do we want to?
Well, as Ms. Howell mentioned, I don't think they were going to be ready for 30 days to get any kind of this set up with finance. So, but as far as guidelines and information for any new applicants, I think that can be presented to them immediately after this is passed. But, as far as the fees structures, it's going to take some time to get that in place. So
Is my motion correct, or is that all right? Do I need to
I think
change?
it's correct.
Okay, there we go.
okay. You all right?
Pass and second.
Okay, you have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Nay.
Okay,
Sorry.
that's okay.
I think we're
you're-
premature.
You're good. We have 4 for, 1 against. Motion carries.
Thank you all.
Okay, that concludes our regular agenda. Pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.087, we will convene to executive session. Be back shortly. Pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.087, no action taken. This concludes this March the 4th, 2025 regular meeting. God bless the great city of Nacogdoches, Texas. United States of America.